Welcome back to Trust Your Oats. In our last episode, we talked about crop rotation, how long, diverse rotations cut chemical use while raising yields, and how hemp fits a field plan that must protect a gluten-free promise. Today, we leave the country. Picture yourself in Denver, holding a bag of oats labeled gluten-free. The claim is legal, regulated, and enforceable. Now put that same bag, same oats, same field, same mill, same lab on a shelf in Sydney. It is now illegal. Not because the oats changed, because the border changed. Gluten-free sounds like a fact about food. It is actually a legal definition, written by governments, and governments disagree. This is Trust the Neighbor. Almost every gluten rule on Earth traces back to one document. Codex Alimentarius is a joint program of the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization. It cannot enforce anything. It writes reference standards countries may adopt. The relevant one is Codex Standard 118, revised in 2008. Its definition of gluten-free: foods made from ingredients that do not contain wheat, rye, barley, oats, or their crossbred varieties, or foods made from those grains but specially processed to remove gluten, where the gluten level does not exceed 20 milligrams per kilogram in total, based on the food as sold to the consumer. 20 milligrams per kilogram is the same thing as 20 parts per million. And here's the sentence that makes today's episode necessary. A footnote attached to the word oats. Oats can be tolerated by most, but not all people who are intolerant to gluten, and therefore the allowance of oats that are not contaminated with wheat, rye, or barley may be determined at the national level. One footnote. Out of it grew 4 different sets of rules. Let's start at home. On August 5, 2013, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration published its final rule defining gluten-free for food labeling, codified at Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 101.91. The rule defines a gluten-containing grain as wheat, rye, or barley, or their crossbred hybrids. To bear the claim, a food must not contain a gluten-containing grain ingredient, must not contain an ingredient derived from those grains that has not been processed to remove gluten, and in any case must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. Read that list again. Wheat, rye, barley. Oats are not on it. In United States law, the oat is not a gluten-containing grain, so oats may go into a gluten-free product that tests under 20 parts per million. Now cross the Atlantic. The European Union's rule is Commission implementing Regulation number 828 of 2014, applicable since July 20, 2016. The number is identical. Gluten-free may be used only where the food as sold to the final consumer contains no more than 20 milligrams per kilogram of gluten. The EU also kept a second tier it calls very low gluten, no more than 100 milligrams per kilogram. And the EU wrote a specific rule for oats. Oats contained in a food presented as gluten-free or very low gluten must have been specially produced, prepared, and or processed in a way that avoids contamination by wheat, rye, barley, or their crossbred varieties, and the gluten content of those oats themselves must not exceed 20 milligrams per kilogram. Notice what Europe did. It regulates the outcome and the process, essentially a description of the purity protocol. After the United Kingdom left the EU, the same framework was retained in British law. Now north, then very far south. Canada took a different road at the first fork. In Canada's food and drug regulations, gluten is defined as gluten protein from the grain of barley, oats, rye, triticale, or wheat, or from a hybridized strain created from at least one of them. In Canadian law, oats are a gluten source by definition. Avenin, the oat's own storage protein, is legally gluten there in a way it is not here. Add section B.24.018, which bars a gluten-free claim on any food containing gluten protein, and for years no oat product in Canada could be called gluten-free, not even a perfect one. That changed on May 29, 2015, with Health Canada's marketing authorization for gluten-free oats and foods containing gluten-free oats, a carve-out. Oats may bear a gluten-free claim provided they were specially produced and processed to avoid contamination by gluten from barley, rye, triticale, or wheat, and contain no more than 20 parts per million of gluten from those cereals. And, this is the part I love, wherever oats are referenced, including the ingredient list, they must be identified as gluten-free oats. Now Australia and New Zealand, the strictest gluten labeling on Earth. Gluten claims there are governed by Standard 1.2.7 of the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code, with conditions set out in Schedule 4. A food may only be labeled gluten-free if it contains no detectable gluten, and contains no oats or oat products, and no cereals containing gluten that have been malted, or products of such cereals. The alternative claim, low gluten, applies to food containing no more than 20 milligrams of gluten per 100 grams. Let me translate. No detectable gluten is not a figure in the legislation. It is a limit of quantitation standard, and methods used in Australia typically detect down to roughly 3 to 5 parts per million. So the Australian bar is not 20 parts per million, it is effectively 0. And low gluten at 20 milligrams per 100 grams is 200 parts per million, 10 times the American and European threshold. Celiac Australia is emphatic that it is not suitable for people with celiac disease. The clause that matters most here is the flat exclusion of oats. In Australia and New Zealand, a food containing oats cannot carry a gluten-free claim at all, whatever the lab says. Our purity protocol oats cannot use that phrase there. So why does one regulator say oats are fine and another say absolutely not? The disagreement is not about contamination. Everyone agrees commodity oats are frequently contaminated with wheat and barley. It is about avenin, the oat's own prolamine protein, and whether it can provoke a celiac immune response even when the oats are perfectly clean. Codex answered with its footnote, tolerated by most but not all. The United States and Europe decided most is enough. Australia and New Zealand decided not all is too many. The science shows something real. Researchers in Melbourne ran a controlled feeding study using purified avenin from uncontaminated oats in adults with treated celiac disease. Among those analyzed, roughly 38% showed dose-dependent T-cell activation measured by serum interleukin-2, and about 59% reported acute symptoms. The study reported no cases of enteropathy, no intestinal damage, and responses declined over a 6-week period of continued avenin intake. So, most people with celiac disease tolerate uncontaminated oats. A minority mount a measurable immune response. Lasting intestinal damage from clean oats is not established. Reasonable regulators read the same evidence and drew the line differently. 2 practical things. First, if you travel with celiac disease, the label does not travel with you. In Australia and New Zealand, low gluten means up to 200 parts per million, and in Europe, very low gluten means up to 100 milligrams per kilogram. Neither is for you. Only gluten-free means gluten-free. Second, introduce oats for the first time with your clinician's guidance. You may be in the minority who reacts to avenin. Every one of those regulations is a different answer to the same anxiety. Can I trust that this oat is what it claims to be? We answered that years ago with a system rather than a number. Clean seed, clean field history, dedicated equipment and milling, tested truckloads, outside laboratory confirmation, a glyphosate-free pledge, a chain of custody from seed to shelf. We do not build to 20 parts per million because it is the legal minimum, but because when the neighbors disagree about where the line is, the honest response is to stay well clear. Trusting the neighbor means recognizing that gluten-free is not one global fact. It is a set of national decisions made by people weighing the same evidence differently. It means knowing that Codex set 20 parts per million and left oats to national discretion, that the United States and Europe both landed on 20, Europe adding a process requirement for oats, that Canada calls oat protein gluten, then carves out a documented exception, and that Australia and New Zealand require no detectable gluten and bar oats outright. Numbers change at borders. Integrity should not. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Trust Your Oats. In our next episode, we will keep pulling on this same thread, following your questions and the science as it moves. Until then, stay healthy, stay curious, and as always, trust your oats.